The Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
And Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him, but this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do? Now that my master is taking the position away from me, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. From the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. At my former church in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, before I became the director of youth and family ministry, I was asked to be the leader of the Emmaus program. The Emmaus program was housed in the Salvation Army, and it was a program that fed guests from the community that were in need, usually over 100. Churches collaborated together and took turns on different times in the weekend. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were covered where people could come to get a hot meal. I learned much during that time. I was in my upper 20s when I began leading in this program. I learned much about poverty, and it changed, and my idea had changed and evolved during that time. My first year, I remember when a group of people came to me and they were angry, they were upset, and they said that a woman was stealing desserts and putting them into her purse. Funny, but I thought to myself, dishonest. In the same year, I remember people came to me complaining about a man endearingly called Elvis. And he would come faithfully to the weekend meals. He had his own home and he had a nice car. And he too took rolls and leftovers and put them in his pocket. And people were appalled. How could he be doing that? He had a nice car and a home. Again, this time I didn't think it was as funny. And I thought, that's really dishonest. I should say something. In the second year, I also heard about people from different churches in the Emmaus program saying that there were people who were making their rounds around the churches to get food and money. They were upset. And I was bothered too, and thought to myself, how could they do that? That's dishonest, and that's working the system. By the third year, my perspective changed. I knew more about the layers of poverty in our community. So it made perfect sense. Why wouldn't a person want to maximize gain while they could? We do the same thing, don't we? When we use credit card points to get flights or vacations, we get out our double coupons at the grocery store, or we borrow a friend's employer discount at the store. No one really ever said that you couldn't take leftovers at the Emmaus meal. In fact, it probably was better that people took leftovers, otherwise we would have had leftovers left. And no one ever said you could only ask for help in one church in town. It makes sense to get much help as possible when you're in need. People who are poor have taught me a lot about how the world really works. What looks dishonest from a vantage point of privilege looks like survival to someone in need. The parable of the dishonest manager, as it's sometimes called, looks different depending on whose viewpoint we share. If we as middle-class people see it from the owner's point of view, the manager does look dishonest. But if we look from the manager's point of view, or the people who have debt, or debt reduced, it all looks different. In the parable, as a rich man praises the manager for his shrewdness, we can imagine shaking his head at his dishonesty and giving a bit of a smile of admiration for his cleverness. Jesus understands from the start that all of the wealth in the story is dishonest. The rich man makes his money from other people's work. They owe him large debts that they may or may not be able to pay back. The manager goes between speaking for the owner and collecting debts. But in the story, the manager shifts his loyalty from the rich man. And he looks around at all the other people in debt. He suddenly sees everything differently. And he takes action for himself, but his action benefits others. He expands his focus past the way they've always done things and sees things differently. Even though the manager is trying to save himself, his choices benefit other people and the rich man as well. With the manager giving the debtors a break, the word of the rich man's generosity will soon spread, and the rich man will gain a positive reputation. That may or may not be a way that you have thought about this parable. Depending on where you are in your own lives, the experiences you have will influence how you engage and connect with Scripture readings. For some of us today, we may be working hard in the fields trying to make ends meet. Other of us may be hoping to pay off debts. And others of us may be caught in between, trapped in systems that feel like they can't change. And yet others of us may be in a place far removed from the people whose work benefits us. Taking time to listen and hear each other's stories helps us to create ways in which we can support each other. I do believe that God wants us to work together for the good of our community and the good of the world. One small but impactful way that comes to mind of communities coming together to support others is through the equal exchange fair trade that Cheryl helps us with. We sell these items in church, coffee and tea and chocolate. Fair trade empowers small-scale farmers in their communities, kind of takes out the middle person. I did some research, and this has been going on for a while. There have been some true benefits in this collaboration together. It supports women leadership at producer co-ops. Environmental preservation through crop diversity has happened because of fair trade. It's also improved yields through soil analysis and much more. Because we listened to one another and heard each other's stories, here is an excellent example of people coming together in Christ's name. May we be open to the work of God bringing us together. May we know that we can learn from each other's perspectives and find common ground. And may we know that that is where love begins. Amen.